Okay, then. Let's look way inside your heart and your spirit and see if God gave you one wish in your lifetime to do for the rest of your life, what would it be?
I'm doing a documentary about celebrity psychosis.
That entire chapter of my life changed me forever.
Ready to go up. Sleep, you guys.
So tell me about the first time you met him. What was he like in that short time you met him? And what was it about him that left that lasting impression?
I met him at Sensei Demur's tournament. He has a tournament every year, and most of the time he has a celebrity there since he does stunt work for films. I remember one time I met Chuck Norris, Bob Wald was there, someone from one of the James Bond movies were there. So every year there was someone. And I think this was 1983, the year before they started making the Karate Kid, or maybe they just had started shooting the Karate Kid. I'm not sure. So I only know Pat as Happy Days. So we were at the tournament, and then I see Pat Morita sitting next to my sensei, and next to Pat Morita, there's an empty chair. So, I'm 14 years old, and I say, hey, that's the guy from Happy Days. Let me just go sit next to him and talk to him. So I did. I just sat next to him, and he was so kind. I think, since he spent so much time in the sanitarium and being around kids and all that stuff, and he does a lot of volunteer work, and he gravitates towards kids and likes to help them out. So basically, I just asked him a few questions. I think I told him, you're awesome on Happy Days and blah, blah, blah. And then he just, said a few nice things. And then my brother was there. He had a 35 millimeter camera. And I said, hey, can you get a picture? So I took a picture, and that was it. And I just thanked him and I left. And that was, the brief moment that I had with him. But, who would have known 30 years later, I would be making a documentary about his life. So it's just kind of strange,
So you'd met him briefly, but like you said, 30 years later, you've gone on to make this film. So what was it? What inspired you to start work on the film?
Right. We were, when we were shooting Fumio Demura's documentary, we had shown a lot of pictures of Pat and videos of Pat that we needed to get permission for his likeness before we can use the footage. And the person that holds the state is Pat Morita's wife, Evelyn. So she said, why don't you guys come down? We just, sit down and talk, and what do you guys want to do? And I said, that's great. Can we also do an interview while we're there? So we went and did an interview. And then after the interview, she started telling me about Pat, all the issues that he had as a child. And, he saw his father get hit, by a car in front of his eyes, and just all the stuff that she said, it stuck with me. And I said, wow, how come no one has ever done a movie or a documentary on him? Said, well, we wrote a book and we're trying to publish the book, and the publisher wants me to embellish all of his issues and problems, and I don't want to do that. So it kind of stopped. We just stopped doing anything. So after that, basically, we did the interview. I thanked them, and then The Real Miyagi came out on Netflix. So like 3 months, 4 months later, she called us up and she said, oh, wow, this documentary made me emotional and all that stuff. And then that was the time that I hit her up. I said, so what do you think about doing a documentary on Pat? And she said, I'm thinking about doing a feature film. I don't know about a documentary. I said, well, why don't we do the documentary first and see what kind of, publicity it generates, to see if there's actually people that want to know about Pat Morita. And then we'll write the screenplay for the film and all that stuff. So she said, yeah, that sounds good. So basically, that's how that got started. That was like 6 years ago. So I've been at this for 6 years, obviously not full time because I have other projects going on. But yeah, this has taken about 6 years.
So in speaking to his wife, Evelyn, and obviously surviving cast of Happy Days, Karate Kid, and all actors, actresses, writers who knew him. What things did you learn about Pat that took you by surprise? I know you mentioned about his father, but what other aspects of his life did you think, wow, I didn't know that about?
Because I was close to Sensei Demura, he would share a lot of stories. So I kind of knew Pat without, doing too much research. So I already knew a lot about him. First thing, when we interviewed people, the first thing that came out of their mouth, they would say Pat was a kind soul. He always tried to make you laugh. He was a giving person. He would donate his time to Shriners, and because he spent most of his time at the hospital. But what took me by surprise was the amount of drinking. When I interviewed the assistant, and she told me that he basically every movie that you see, he was drunk. All the movies, everything. You talk about Karate Kid film from beginning to end, he was drunk, but he was good at hiding it. So he would basically, every morning when he got up, he had coffee with vodka. So, and after that, he would, I don't know, chew gum or whatever. So people that he was working, no one really knew that he was drunk. The only time you started noticing that is when he was in his 70s. After you've been drinking since you've been 12 till 70, it takes a toll on you. So it was more noticeable when he was 70. And that was the surprising thing to me. And some of the stuff that he did when he was drunk that, I only shared one thing.
What's interesting about this, as a little fun fact, is that this is the third film you've made that in some fashion references the Karate Kid films. For those who don't know, there was Empty Hands, The Real Karate Kids. And then, of course, we mentioned Sensei Demura's story, The Real Miyagi. And now we have more than Miyagi about Pat Morita. Was it your intention to have a Karate Kid theme trilogy of films, or is it just something that happened organically?
Yeah, no, it happened naturally. I've been in karate most of my life. I've taken all sorts of different things, Shotokan, Shitoryu, Taekwondo, I've taken everything. I love the martial arts. So any time that there is a possibility of me working on a project that's related to karate, I go for it because it's a complete joy. It's like me being in Disneyland, you put two passions together, filmmaking and karate. It's very gratifying for me. So basically what happened is we were shooting the Real Karate Kids in Florida, and Sensei Fumio Demura was in one of the panels. It was an AAU tournament. I think he was doing like master's classes and stuff. And I had taken karate with him when I was 10 years old for a period of time, like maybe 10 years or something. So I hadn't seen him for 20 years. So I went, and Sensei has a very good memory. I mean, he remembers everyone, everything, everyone's name. So I went and said, "Hey, Sensei, how are you?" And then without hesitation, I said, "Hi, Kevon, how are you? What are you doing here?" And that caught me off surprise, that he remembers my name. He said, "Hey, Kevin, I'm going for lunch. If you want to come, we can go hang out and all that stuff." So we went out and had lunch. And then I looked at him. I said, "Hey, Sensei, I've been wanting to do a documentary of you all my life." And then he looks at me and said, "Kevin, you better do it soon because I don't know how much time I have to live." Because back then he was 70. And so basically I called my producing partner. I said, "Hey, I have the next project. Let's do Sensei Demura." So that's how that ended up happening. And then with this More Than Miyagi is what I said before with, we went and did the interview and I met Evelyn, and then that's how that got started. So it's just progressed naturally. And after this project, there's something else that's also related to karate that we'll see if it happens. So, but yeah, I want to stay in this karate world. Not that I'm not going to do anything else, but I just want to continue doing an autobiography on like famous people that are in karate is wonderful for me. If I can just keep on doing that, that's great.
One of the things I've noticed that those two films have in common, Real Miyagi and Pat Morita's story, is both men's battle with racism in post-war America.
Right.
But both managed to turn that around. Now, as a filmmaker, charting first Sensei's journey and then Pat's journey and the challenges of racism, was that something you yourself could resonate with? Was that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Everything that I have worked on, there is a section about racism, because that's what I went through and I can resonate with that. I mean, it's not a, especially when you're a kid, when you come here. I was 10 years old when I went through all this stuff, and it just stuck with me, and it's always going to be with me. And I'm very sensitive to that. So like there's another documentary that I'm working on right now for a friend, Pepe Serna. He was the guy in Scarface. I looked at this documentary and I said, this is what you need to add. And one of the things that I suggested to him, I said, when you came here, you were, 20 years old and you're Hispanic. Did you go through any, and he said, yeah, I did. And then that just, now I'm adding a section because of, it's just who I am. I mean, it's out there, and it's, people need to know that it's not right to discriminate against people.
But what's interesting with Pat is that he uses his comedy in a very innovative fashion to almost play on the stereotypical tropes of Asian Americans.
Right.
Do you think that his comedy in a lot of ways was innovative and paved the way for other Asian Americans in comedy and entertainment to break out and become more recognized and accepted?
Oh, absolutely. He was way ahead of his time. I mean, just his name was Hip Nip. I mean, can you imagine having a name these days with the Hip Nip?
It sends shivers up my spine, to be honest. When I heard that he was called that, I thought, you can do that today, and nor should you.
From what I understand, it's the manager that he had suggested that name, and he just went with it. And for a while, we thought about calling our documentary that. And then I went to a couple of people that are in the Asian American Association with films and all that stuff. I said, what do you think if we, and they said, no, it's a nice name, but I don't recommend you naming your documentary that. So he was ahead of his time, 100%. I mean, back then, I can't think of anyone that, the only person that was a comedian back then in the 30s was Jack Sue. I don't know if you remember Jack Sue. He was the only person. And even Ken Jeong, when he goes on stage, he always thanks Pat Morita for, opening up, he was the first Asian that got his TV series. I mean, he was nominated for an Oscar. He has a star on Walk of Fame. I mean, he definitely paved the way for other Asians.
It's another instance as well I've noticed in the film. Again, I suspect it's quite organic, and it draws on your personal experience in that Pat used comedy to not only did he play on those racial stereotypes, but he used them to break those down and to connect with an audience and a people that would largely see him as the enemy. And that's a theme that resonates in the film you produced, Travel Ban, using comedy to break down
stereotypes,
walls of racism, if you like. Again, is that something that's happened organically, or did you think, is that a story you want to tell, how entertainment and comedy sort of unites rather than divides?
No, with Pat, that happened organically. I was just looking at his videos, and then I said, basically, he did a lot of self-deprecating humor, and a lot of stuff that I did research and looked for. Mainly, that was what he was talking about. So it just happened organically. It was nothing that I thought of. That's what it is with these documentaries. I mean, you have a idea of what you're going to do, and then once you start interviewing people and talking to people, it just takes a whole nother direction. And then when you start editing it, it takes another direction. Like, for example, all these people that I interviewed, Ralph Zapka and all that stuff, wonderful. They're all wonderful people. They knew him from the time that he started doing the Karate Kid films. So no one really knew him prior to that. So for me, it was very difficult to tell his story beforehand. If I wouldn't have had the audio clips from American Legends, there was really no one that could tell me any of that information. But at the same time, I didn't want to take the audio and turn it into like a photo montage, because people turn out, they just tune out as soon as they see, photo montage of someone talking and all that stuff. So I had to be very creative and to splice it as fast as possible to keep people's attention. So that was like the challenging part for me when I edited this documentary.
Was there anything in putting the documentary together and speaking to so many people. I mean, obviously some are not with us anymore, like Gary Marshall, Tom Bosley, and so forth.
John Avildsen too, he passed away.
Yeah, and so many, so many people stepped up and wanted to relay their experiences of Pat. Was there anybody that you couldn't feature because of time factors?
Yes. Hilary Swank. She was nice enough. I mean, she emailed us and she said she was working on a Netflix series 2 years ago. She said, honestly, I don't have the time. And I said, no, we completely understand. So yeah, Hilary Swank, I think it would have been important because that was the film that started her career. So I wanted to interview Pat's second wife and the kids. And for some reason, they didn't want to do it. I don't know what kind of conflict they had in their life, and they didn't want to bring back memories or whatever it was. And I understand. So I didn't want to push anyone. Whoever doesn't want to be part of it, I don't want to twist their arm. It's, this is your father. If you don't want to say anything, that's fine. It's up to them. But it would have been nice to get, Ali Morita to say a few words, anything, whether it's good, negative, bad, whatever. So at least we know her point of view too. But yeah, that was the only person that I wish we could have got.
Now, one thing that so many things come across in the documentary. The other one is the impact that Pat's performance as Miyagi in the first Karate Kid film not only had on him as an actor, but also in the world of karate. So I want to touch on Pat the actor. Known as a comedian or as a comedic actor after this. Here he is now doing this dramatic role, almost front and center.
Right.
When you first saw the film, were you shocked at not only him being in quite a serious role, but how good he was? In particular, the scene where he's grieving over his wife and child who had died at Manzanar.
Right. The first time that I saw it, I was a teenager, so it really didn't have that much effect on me. I was into martial arts, and all of our friends, we all went to the local mall here, and I remember there was a line wrapped around the whole mall. That was like the first time I stood in line to watch anything. And another thing that's funny, that I run a film festival here also in Irvine that we honor John Avildsen. Before he passed away, like 3 years before he passed away. So we came and gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award. And it ended up being in the same theater that I watched The Karate Kid. So it's weird how that played out. But yeah, that scene is very powerful. I mean, without that scene, it made you realize what Japanese Americans went through and what they suffered. And they were going to take that scene out because the producers were saying that, that slows down the whole narrative of the movie. Now you have action, you're going from here to here, and all of a sudden you have 7 minutes that you slow down the film, and we're learning about this actor. Does anyone really care? But Robert Mark came and he fought for that scene. He said, no, this is the most important scene. Without this scene, we're not going to get to know who this person is. So, and I believe, and a lot of people, even Pat Morita said that, he thinks it's because of that scene that got him nominated. So yeah, it was a very powerful scene.
But let's go now to the impact of Karate Kid and Miyagi on karate. Because what's interesting is that where Bruce Lee, an actor / martial artist, sent droves of people to Kung Fu schools.
Correct.
The Karate Kid in general, and I suppose people hoping to be taught by their own Miyagi sensei, drove thousands of people to karate dojos all over America, all over the world. I would imagine that's quite unprecedented to have someone who was not a martial artist to have such an impact on karate.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, the reason I started it was because of Bruce Lee. I mean, even in Iran, Bruce Lee was a big icon all over the world. So it was because of him that I started getting a broomstick and turning it into nunchucks. And I'm sure a lot of people did that. But even though he was Kung Fu, people they weren't really sure what Kung Fu was. They just wanted to get into martial arts. So for me, I went to the local YMCA and whatever that was there, and it was karate. So I started taking karate. But yeah, when the Karate Kid came out, it just catapulted. It's so many. I remember Sensei Demers, people were lining up in drones. I mean, it's so many people. But now I wonder, I've never asked, but has Cobra Kai done the same thing for karate? I wonder if it's boosted, submissions in karate. I've never asked any of the friends, the teachers that I know. I wonder if it's done the same thing.
What's really great about your film? I'm sorry if I sound like a sycophant, but the film really impressed me.
Thank you.
Like the real Miyagi, you wear your heart on your sleeve when telling this man story. It's very sincere, and like so much of your work. Do you feel now that you've spoken to everybody in his life who you could speak to, family, friends, colleagues, and did so much research, do you feel you know the man better now? And if so, how has that shaped your view of him?
That's a good question. I actually like him better now. I mean, we're all humans. We all make mistakes. I mean, if you really examine Pat's history, he suffered from spinal tuberculosis when he was 2 years old. Back then in the 30s, they didn't have treatment for tuberculosis. What they would do is put him in a body cast and, from shoulder to knee, and have him lay out in the sun and hoping that the vitamin D is going to cure him. Can you imagine doing that for 9 years? He did that for 9 years. And then finally, when he did the spinal surgery that worked, the war breaks out and the FBI comes and escorts him and takes him to the internment camps. And in the internment camps, he can't communicate with his parents because he's been in the hospital for so long and spoke English, so he doesn't speak Japanese, and he can't communicate with his family. And then he gets out, after a year and a half when they get out, they have to sell everything, to go in their internment camp. So they're basically left with nothing. They have to start all over again. And then with the discrimination with the show business, I mean, there's so many things that goes on and on and on. How do you think you would have dealt with that? If it was me, I mean, alcohol, maybe I would have done some worse drugs. So, it's amazing that this guy, was able to overcome all these, boundaries, all these, obstacles that he had in his life and create the most iconic role in cinema history. I mean, I appreciate the guy. I mean, I have more appreciation of him now than I did before. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to go through all what he did to become what he became.
So Pat's been gone now for 15, 16 years.
Right, 2005, yeah.
Yes, so 16 years. And in your film, you go into, carefully and with great respect, yet, but very openly as well, into a lot of detail about his life. Is there still more to tell of Pat's story that could fill another film or a book that we could learn from and would add to his legacy?
Definitely. I mean, when he wrote a manuscript, and that's what I went with, right before he passed, he wrote 45 pages of it. It went all the way up to like the first Karate Kid. And then after that, he had moved out and he had a roommate and he continued. I mean, he finished his book, but the problem was the roommate ended up taking the rest of the manuscript. So I didn't get it. I couldn't read it. But from what I have, he goes into detail about how, how he was treated in the internment camps and what he had to do to pass the time. There is definitely, I would say, a 10-part documentary series that could go into detail about so many different things. We just scratched the surface here. And even in my, the edit that I have, the original edit was like 2 hours, 2.5 hours. So I took at least an hour out because when they looked at the film, they said, yeah, this is interesting, but no one's going to sit 2.5 hours and watch the whole thing. So yeah, there's a lot more to tell.
Pat Morita. Mr. Pat Morita.
Oh yeah.
Pat Morita, ladies and gentlemen. Lenny Bruce's mother named him the Hip Nip, but he hung on because now all of a sudden he had an angle.
He would tend to do the same show over again. And then he couldn't figure out why he wasn't getting laughs.
I don't think he paid much attention to the rules of the game. You know, he kind of did what he wanted to do.
He really embraced the things that many of us run away from. He ran to it.
He opened for Vic Damone, Connie Stevens, and Red Fox, who put him on his show.
He was just a lovely, lovely man.
Pat went on and became a huge star.
And he created one of the iconic characters in American cinema.
One thing I learned with comics is they were actually some of the most unhappy, tortured people, and their comedy comes from pain.
I mean, he was in a cast for like 9 years, from his knees to like his neck for his childhood.
The day he gets out, he walks into a war.
He had a lot of inner demons. He struggled a lot with depression, and he was drinking too much. I think he was doing too much drugs.
He was drinking so much that I went to the line producer and said, I'm scared to death he's going to fall off a cliff.
And he was stumbling and he fell flat on his face.
That was when it really, really hit home and he realized, I've got a big problem.
That entire chapter of my life changed me forever.